Is
All
that
right.
my sister-in-law?
It is your sister-in-law. It is mostly family so far. My friend Debbie Jarvis from Spirit Uncensored is here. My Aunt Cynthia, my mom, my Uncle Gary, my Auntie Leanie, my mother-in-law, my cousins. So far, this is just family. And I am perfectly fine with that. So first, I want to welcome you all to Spirit Uncensored. I'm grateful that we are coming together as a family in this way. Maybe there will be some additional participants like Debbie who are not technically related to all of us, but we really what let me just start by saying that Spirit Uncensored is an organization that is designed for us to live our lives with love as a religion. That regardless of our belief systems, and I'm grateful for the fact that right now, today, we have a variety of spiritual faiths or lack of faith. My Uncle Gary and I, Jerry Carey is what he is named as in the corner. Uncle Gary and I advertised that we were having this conversation about how to create a world that works for everyone, which is the Centers for Spiritual Living tagline. This idea that regardless of our faith traditions, regardless of our belief systems, that we can all come together, move forward as a country, regardless of how the election unfolds, regardless of how the news media is covering the election, that as a country, each one of us can come together and have really challenging conversations that need to exist within our own families. And so Uncle Gary offered to lead this conversation about unity and civility. And I want to be very clear that the name of this event, America, Unity, and Civility, was Uncle Gary's choice. I started by saying, what should we call this? And I also want to note that the reason this event is happening in the way that it did and the way that it is because my mother, Shira Roth, who is on the screen, and I led a conversation about the civil rights revolution that we're living in. And Uncle Gary and other and Uncle Gary called me on the fact that my mother has a very similar political belief system as I do. And he also called me on the fact that our October guest, who was a friend of mine, they are still a friend of mine. That friend uses the they, them pronoun. They also have similar political beliefs. And even though we did not talk about politics, my friend Sean and I did not talk about politics, Uncle Gary could pick up on the fact that Sean and I have very similar belief systems. And so Uncle Gary noted the fact that I had 2 months of events in a row of having a guest who had similar political beliefs than I do. And he said, I think it's important for me to feel safe in your organization that you show different perspectives and different points of view. And in all honesty, in regards of the conversations that I've been having with different people in different political perspectives, Uncle Gary has been willing to have challenging conversations with me. And actually Auntie Leanie, who's here as well, her and I just spoke last night for 2 hours about what my experience has been as the Black one on the Jewish side of my family. And my Aunt Cynthia is here, is familiar with my experience of what it's like to be the Jewish one and the Black side of my family. And because I personally live a life where I feel othered in literally every environment that I'm in my own immediate family. I'm the only mixed race person in every space I'm generally ever in, including this one that we're in right here. Even though it is filled with my family, no one here really knows what my mixed race experience is like. And I personally have never really talked about it. I just started talking about it once the country started having this difficult conversation about race. I realized that I wasn't having these crucial conversations within my own family, within my home, with my mother, with my Uncle Gary, with my Auntie Leania, with my Aunt Cynthia, with my congregation. Linda White goes to my spiritual center with me at Ahaya, and her and I had a great conversation this morning. Reverend David Allen Cruz is on my board for Spirit Uncensored, and we had some challenging conversations about race at our board. And David and I went to dinner and had a conversation about race with him and his wife. So I've had a lot of really difficult conversations, and I'm grateful for the fact that Uncle Gary wanted to initiate and have this space where everyone of different beliefs has an opportunity to use their voice and speak up. And so I wanted to start by sharing a quote. One of the things that I've been doing personally to deal with healing, and we're going to get into the healing of it a little bit later, but first I wanted to share a quote from a reading that this book was written a long time ago. The person who wrote it is long gone from this earth, and it is a book of daily affirmations. His name is Dr. Daniel Lee Morgan. I'm putting the quote, I'm going to put the quote and the name of the book here. First, I put the quote, and it says, this was from October 16th, from this daily list of affirmations and readings. And it says, the modern world longs for unity, yet remains divided. Even so, there are not as many divisions among nations of the world as are to be found within individuals. The reason for it is that we are more anxious lest the truth be reserved than we be revealed. We emphasize the things we divide instead of the things we unite. And so this quote is basically saying that we cannot blame our government, our news media, our schools for the world that we live in. We have to consciously choose to participate and have conversations about unity, have challenging conversations with each other so that each one of us can serve as a space for healing. And everyone who has shown up for this experience today has demonstrated that each one of you are choosing to be the change that you wish to see in the world, are choosing to participate in challenging conversations about politics and race. And so I want to start first with, and actually I really want to give Uncle Gary credit for initiating this conversation, for showing up in the way that he did. Jerry Carey is what he is named as. And maybe I can rename him so that it's easier for everyone to see. I'm going to do that right now. And so one of the things that Uncle Gary and I both agreed on, I'm going to start with where we agree, and then we're going to get into the disagreement part. But I want to be very clear that this is a space for all of you. What happens for me in these Spirit Uncensored events on our second Sundays of the month is I have a tendency to hear from people after the fact of, you didn't say this and you didn't do that. I can't be everything for everyone, but what I can do is create a space where everybody has a voice and everybody has an opportunity to speak up. So it is up to you to either, you have a choice. You can raise your virtual hand and I can call on you. You can unmute yourself and jump in the conversation. You can comment in the comments. Whatever you all are comfortable doing, feel free to do. Generally, a lot of these conversations work is just me and the other person talking, and that's it. Sometimes people ask questions, sometimes people don't. Everybody is different. Uncle Gary, Debbie is asking you to turn on the light because she cannot see you.
Oh, I can agree with
her. So this conversation gets to unfold however each one of you feels comfortable. And I want to also preface by letting you all know that for the last 6 months, I have been doing a lot of my own personal work, apart from the fact that I've been having really honest and authentic conversations with my family. And I'm so grateful that I was born into a family where I can have these conversations. I know everyone does not have family members who are willing to get on the internet and say, let's talk about race, let's talk about politics. And I'm grateful for the fact that I come from a family that's willing to do that. But I've been doing my work in the sense that I've been taking classes through many different spiritual centers to learn about diversity and inclusion, because just because I have this experience of being an American with this skin does not mean that I had the education of how to identify what beliefs I have about my brown skin that don't serve me and what it means to be Black in America. Our reality is that our school systems are, as I was saying, none of our institutions are designed for unity. And it is incumbent upon each one of us to do our own work individually, to be a space for unity and be able to support other people with different belief systems. So I've been doing that work. I'm currently enrolled and at a class through the Agape Spiritual Center that's led by a diversity inclusion expert and has people of all races. I am participating in healing circles for Black people only through different spiritual centers like the Ahaya Center for Spiritual Living. So I'm taking lots of classes, I'm doing lots of spiritual work, and I did all of that so that I was qualified to lead this conversation today. But like I said, if I say something that offends you, tell me here. Don't tell me secretly after the fact. This is our space to have an open, upfront conversation. So I want to start with the area that Uncle Gary and I both agree on, and that is the fact that the country that we live in has a for-profit media industry. And in the last week, as we have experienced a very interesting and a very tumultuous election and very divided election, there is no one single resource that and media news source that everyone in the Zoom room agrees on as being credible. And the fact that there is no nonprofit that Americans can understand and believe in as being a credible resource in this country is really problematic. And personally, as somebody who works in the entertainment industry, I can tell you, no one is trying to focus on unity. No one is trying to ensure that that people are properly informed. What's happening is that each person in media industries are just as uneducated as each one of us is. And I can tell you that the amount of personal work that I've done for myself, I had to look really hard for those resources. They were not ready and easy available to me. I had to know people. People had to email me personally and tell me about these resources existing. And Spirit Uncensored is here as an example of that. But somebody has to know me to know that this experience exists. This is not easy to find. There's no Google search term of, if you do Unity in LA, Spirit Uncensored is not going to come up. And so one of the things that we have to do is participate in this. And I want to note, my wife reminded me to do this. I did not do this. My wife just private messaged me. I did not pray us in. So I'm going to pray us in now. I invite us all to get comfortable wherever we are and bringing up our own individual idea of what God is. Maybe it's energy, maybe it's nothing. However we define God, bringing up that image and knowing that the diverse expressions of God that each one of us has is a representation of the diversity of this country that we live in. That each person is coming here to this experience conscious of the fact that that our differences are to be celebrated, that we have a right to be represented, and that we have the right to use our voice to be heard and to speak up for our truth. That it is important that spiritual spaces exist where everyone of all faiths, all beliefs, all political affiliations are welcome and have a voice. And I am so grateful that each person has shown up to this experience today with this intention to be and participate in a space for unity, a space for evolution, and a space for growth. And I am so grateful to know this, grateful to speak this, grateful for everyone who has come together and brought their energy to this experience. And I just affirm this as I let it be so. So I release this saying, and so it is. Amen. Thank you. And thank you, Ronnie, for the reminder. So I've been talking so much. Uncle Gary, thank you for being quiet. Do you want to chime in and say something?
Yeah, you touched about the whole point about our media right now. We talked about that before, and it's really difficult for me to put into words how big of a threat that is to our way of life and our democracy. You start to realize how important the role of the media is in everyone's life, and we have a mainstream media that has gone 100% all out to support one side of the political spectrum, and we have a lesser medium like Fox News and Newsmax, who are more to the right, but yet I see a little bit of balance when I watch Fox News. But I really believe that, without making a judgment, the idea of the scandal that came out about Joe Biden just before the election, that not a single major media outlet covered it, it's unbelievable. And it's a disservice. I think people should know. We talked about this earlier. Get the information out there and let the people make up their own minds as to what's important and what's not, who they want to vote for. My sister was talking the other day, and I agree with her. If if the person I support does not win an election and it's fair and it's covered properly, so be it. That's the will of the American people, and that's our way. But with all the shenanigans that have gone on in the past 4 years, it's disturbing. It's really disturbing to me.
So I do want to address, and I want to first start by saying the reason I told Uncle Gary that I didn't want to get into the specifics of politics too much, only because personally I am uninformed. What I am personally aware of is there is information on the internet that is unproven, and sometimes it is reported by a news organization. And this is what I was talking about with the challenges of the media industry itself, of how many internet rumors do you address on during the news and which ones don't you? And the reality is that our news organizations are one or two ways. You have news organizations that are filled with people that voted for Joe Biden and news organizations of people who voted for Donald Trump. I work in this industry, and I'm telling you that I cannot name a single resource for anybody here that has a newsroom filled with people who support both Biden and Trump. And the reason why I think that doesn't exist is because we don't know how to communicate with each other. When somebody interviews a journalist, when a job is open at a network, at a newspaper, and the person who's interviewing that person is having a conversation about news, one of the questions they're going to ask is, where do you get your news from? And if they're meeting with let's say, a Trump supporter who is getting their news from Fox News, getting their news from I can't name other things because I don't engage in those things. I have asked one of the things that I personally do is try to talk to people who believe differently than I do, and I ask, where did you get this information from? And what I see is Fox News, YouTube, and sites that are very unsubstantiated, that I know for a fact that they are Russian bots based on me doing my own personal research into those sites. So for me, I have my own sense of what's considered credible and what's not considered credible. And my father and I have been having a lot of conversations because my father draws a lot of conclusions based on events like this. Somebody who says, I had a conversation with Joe Biden and this is what he said, a YouTube video. And so who is more credible, a journalist or somebody who literally said they had this conversation to Joe Biden and this is what he said? What's happening in this country is we don't know what's credible and we don't know what's not. And so I can't address whether the news media should have covered that story about Joe Biden because I'm not a news person. I'm a minister. So I can have a conversation with you about unity, but what I can tell you, let me just say, is that for the last week to prepare for this event, what I did is I watched CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC so that I had as well-rounded a perspective about the election. So I can talk about the election, about the way the votes are counted. I can talk about the fact that Fox News called Arizona before every other news organization. And I can talk about how conservatives came on Fox News and criticized the journalists for making those choices. And Fox News had the people who made the choices around what they were calling to explain the methodology that they use. CNN did not do that for me. CNN did not explain the methodology. CNN did not have people accusing them of calling states too early. And so personally, as a viewer watching all three networks for the first time in my life, watching all three of these networks, I personally feel like Fox News handled it better than anybody. However, the moment that Joe Biden was called as the electorate, I noticed a shift in Fox's news. At first, they were doing all of these things, calling states for Joe, and then they started really criticizing and attacking Joe. They didn't attack Joe for 3-4 days until Joe came. They said it was him, and then Fox News started attacking him. So as a viewer, I just watched this. But who has time to watch 24 hours of news? I was in a silent meditation retreat, and so I watched all three networks as much as possible so I can do what I could to inform you all about my experience. Uncle Gary, please tell me about your experience of watching the election.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to quickly touch on that point. You had someone who had emails, text messages, and personal contact with Joe Biden. And whether he's believable or not believable, the point is, in any other decade, you would not go to a major news organization and not hear his name, not one time. It was deliberately hidden from the public. And again, that you can report in such a way that's unbiased and say, this person, this is alleged, this is whatever, make up your own mind. But they didn't even report it. And that's what I think is really a disservice to America, that these go ahead.
So I'm telling you, I can't speak to it because I was watching all of those networks, and Fox did not cover that story when I was watching it. So I'm just telling you, I am ill informed to be able to have that conversation with you. And I also want yes, Auntie Leni, please speak up.
You do know that news stations are not the ones that are supposed to call an election.
Yes, and that is problematic. I agree. So this is why I said that Uncle Gary and I are starting on the same point, where we are both agreeing with the fact that our media, the way that our media is currently designed, is not in our best interest. And so I think based on the fact that we can all agree on that, I want to get into the next questions. And I told Uncle Gary, we're going to start with Uncle Gary's questions first. And if we finish this and we've only gotten to Uncle Gary's questions, fantastic. I approved of his questions so that we can move forward. So, and I'll put it in the chat for you all. And like I said, this is intended to be a discussion. This is not just me and Uncle Gary talking. And so if you have thoughts, please weigh in. Uncle Gary's question was, what is happening in America to fuel division and incivility? And I'm just gonna give the floor to you, Uncle Gary, first. What do you think is happening in America to fuel division and incivility?
Okay, well, I really believe, first of all, that, back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever, people had true First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. You say what you think, you say what you believe. Someone, maybe debates your point, but at the end of the day, you agree that we're all Americans and we all want the same thing. We want to be safe, we want to be prosperous, we want a great country. But it's not like that anymore. If you say something that the radical side of your opposition in politics, if they don't agree with you, they try to destroy you in many ways.
Can I address that?
Sure, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So I disagree. Because I believe that right now we're having a free conversation. No one is going to jail over the opinions that we have. However, we are being held accountable for our choices. Therefore, as an example, if I say something racist, that information is going to be out there. People are going to know that I said something racist. If I get fired from my job for being racist, that doesn't mean that I didn't have freedom of speech. It means that I face consequences for my actions. And I personally believe that the reason that we are experiencing division and incivility in America is because we don't know how to have conversations with each other. We were born into a country where our schools did not teach us how to have these conversations with each other. And my mother, who was a teacher here, can tell you, as she learned how to teach first grade, nothing as part of the education system is how do we create a space for unity? This is not what schools' jobs are for. What schools are taught to do is to teach us a test, to a standardized test that doesn't actually help us. None of us are using the algebra that we learned in school. It would have been a lot more helpful if we learned how to have conversations about unity and civility. And right now, as our schools are closed for a pandemic, we had a perfect opportunity to learn how to create spaces for unity and civility in our own homes.
Well,
And instead of doing that, we figured out some sort of online thing that didn't work for anyone. Instead of just saying, you know what, let's close schools for a year, let parents do what they want to do. The states can do, that's a whole nother thing of how the pandemic should have been handled. But I personally believe that the reason that we have division and incivility in America is because we've never been taught otherwise. Our churches, our media, our schools have never taught us otherwise.
You and I went to school at a different time.
We did, and I'm telling you, they didn't teach me that either.
When I went to school, there was
Oh.
teaching of unity.
Okay, well, they didn't do it when I went to school.
You started every day with the Pledge of Allegiance.
That's not unity. I didn't feel included in that.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying the fact that there was a emphasis on community, on patriotism, and I don't think you can take patriotism.
But Black people were excluded from that, so you
not
can't
my
really
school.
talk about.
Not my school. They weren't.
No,
No,
Karen.
they weren't.
No,
Go
Karen.
ahead. You all were around. I cannot speak to what life was like in the 60s and the 70s. People from the 60s and 70s, speak up and disagree with me.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Black people in the room, I would love to hear from you.
I went to an all-white school in a pretty affluent area of the northwest side of Chicago, and we, then it was my junior year or senior year that we bussed in Black children from, unfortunately, they had to drive, on a bus for a long time before they got to school. But our school was prepared to welcome them, to accept them, and to try and understand, as you're saying that we did try to understand the differences in, the fact that we're not all white, and that, there are different beliefs and so forth. And as you and I were talking last night, we grew up in our younger years, before the end of high school, that Black people were not good people. All they wanted to do was that they were lazy, that they wanted to steal, and you certainly didn't want a Black person living next door to you. Okay, that's how we did grow up. And as I told you last night, when your mom came into my life, not at the beginning, because at the beginning we were still, taught, well, you can't have intermarriages. And so that, was very difficult. But I think you were like 2 years old, maybe 3, whatever. No, I think you were 2 years old.
I was 2.
And yeah, and when the minute that I was able to accept the fact that both you and your mom were Black, that I loved both of you from the minute you came into our lives. And like I said, it wasn't until you were 2 years old that you really were accepted into my life anyway. Forget what my parents grew up with and all that stuff. And the two of you changed my attitude and my feeling and acceptance towards somebody in a different, colored skin, let enough different religions, because, I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood too. So, but yeah, I mean, it was completely different. It started, like I said, it was my senior year in high school that the starting of the acceptance and understanding that there were good people, and they're people with a different color skin. That's all, and not, I mean, there are good people that are white, and there are good people that are black, and good people that are Asian, and there are bad people that are white, and there are bad people that are black and Asian, and so forth. So, that's my experience. Not only as, like, say, from a childhood on, but into my adult life. And when I became an adult and became a parent for the first time, that's when you were 2 years old. So, and I love my sister-in-law and I miss her dearly. And I love you and miss you dearly. And I miss my other nieces over here and my other two nieces there.
So one of your nieces has her virtual hand raised. So Miranda, did you want to jump in with your comment?
Virtual hand.
Yes.
Yeah, on the subject of like unity and how we can come together and where we think it started and what could have caused it, a big factor or influence, I feel, of the division started when, well, police brutality has been around for a long time, and I'm not Black or anything. I'm not trying to speak for all African Americans, but they still feel, well, from what I know and what I've been told and what I've talked about with other people, they still feel it exists today. They don't feel like they're heard or understood, and some of them aren't interested in trying to explain themselves or how they feel because they don't feel they should, and they shouldn't have to prove themselves. And then there are people who don't think it's still something that affects them or their opportunities, which I kind of think it does personally, because you go into a meeting or not a meeting, but like a job interview, or you want to get into a certain school or whatever the case is, and you have a certain name, or you put down that you're a certain color, or you look, well, they base their judgment a lot on how you look, not just how you act and how smart you are. And I feel like that's a big thing with unity. Like, they don't feel connected with, like, we can't relate to each other, basically.
Thank you, Miranda. Mom, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I was one of those Black students who went to a school on the northwest side of Chicago. And as the person coming in, I had a very different experience. The last time we had one of these conversations online, Karen, I told you how all of us, all of the Black students from the West Side, were immediately put in basic classes. There was basic, essential, regular, and honors. Disregarded our elementary school records and put us into basic. That does not sound like trying to create unity and trying to give us an opportunity to learn about each other. What they were communicating to the students in Albany Park, the white students in Albany Park, was these are African Americans and they are intellectually inferiors to you.
I also would like to note the fact that they bust the smart kids out of the Black schools means that the Black schools didn't have smart kids in them anymore. And each school benefits from the presence of children that are interested in school. And so I think that what we're seeing in the Chicago Public School District, specifically around the deterioration of schools in Black neighborhoods, is not about the quality of education and everything to do with the fact that when you bust those smart kids out of those schools, they did things like what my mother did, which was move to the north side of Chicago. She didn't stay in the projects on the west side. So the projects of the west side were filled with the kids that were not smart enough to go to be special, to go to the schools with Auntie Leanie and Uncle Gary. And so what happens is that Auntie Leanie's only experience of Blackness is the cream of the crop from the west side, instead of somebody that did not get straight A's, that struggled in school. And people of all races struggle in school. But when you choose skin color and take the smart kids out of the schools where the Black kids are and put them in the white schools, you are both doing the white school a disservice by prohibiting access to the entire Black experience beyond the ones that are good at school. And you're prohibiting the Black kids by not giving them access to smart kids because you bust them all out of the district. And now you have communities where all of the smart people and all of the professionals moved out and live in spaces, predominantly white areas, where I'm just going to speak for myself. I have felt othered in every predominantly white space I'm in. And even though half of my family is white, and even though I grew up in white settings, I have never felt accepted as a regular human being with Black skin in the country that I live in. And I believe, getting back to our conversation about politics, the reason that we're having Uncle Gary, you mentioned you felt like we didn't have freedom of speech. It's not that we don't have freedom of speech, it's that there are consequences for our actions. And the problem is that every American is undereducated about race. And with all of the work that I've had to do for myself to educate myself about race, I'm telling you that the access to unity and inclusion, where people of all races are welcome and don't feel heat. These classes have been really difficult for me. It's been hard for me to hear a lot of the things that people are saying. And I would like to answer that, that I believe, like I said, the reason that division and incivility exists is because we are uneducated on how to create it. Ronnie says she would like to speak.
Hi, everyone. So I grew up in the South in Arkansas. And it's definitely a place where I went to school with people who, would don the Confederate flag. And there was, I was in class with a guy who wore a, white pride T-shirt one day, and it was huge to reenact the Civil War. So he participated in that, and he said that was why he wore the shirt. So that was pretty much kind of a common thing. Like you really were aware that there were some people that like wouldn't speak to us in class. We had race fights in school. We had fights on our lunch break. I mean, we had fights, pretty much during, it was lunch break. And I remember the police were at our school a few times just to prevent the violence. For me, I didn't really feel patriotic. We did say the Pledge of Allegiance in school. And it was mainly due to like what I started to identify as patriotism was racism. And I remember in elementary school during the Iraq War, and people were saying stuff like a lot of the kids were saying stuff like, oh, we should nuke them and all these things. And I was just thinking, geez, like this is how we as Americans disregard life. That my classmates were joking about us blowing up and killing other human beings. So I, just knowing the history of this country, the history of racism, and how those in power, governments have disregarded life and have been warmongering, I never associated myself with patriotism. I felt like that's what patriotism meant. And as I got older and had friends from different countries who would wear, their country's gear and be proud, I would get kind of a little jealous because I was like, I've lived in the United States, but I wasn't proud of that just based on our history of racism and where I grew up. It can be pretty scarring.
Thank you, Ronnie. I appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone bringing their voices and the fact that this is a very civil conversation about our differences. Look at us being the change that we wish to see in the world. I am grateful for all of this. I'm going to move on to the next question unless somebody else. Yes.
One thing before we get off of this one,
please.
I just want to make one comment.
Yes.
When you said that you have the freedom of speech, but there's consequences. That's like saying people in China have freedom of speech, but they're going to get arrested and thrown in jail. That's not freedom of speech. And I think that people should be able to, like, what they call the hidden Trump voters? Where did that come from? Because people are afraid to say out loud that they support Donald Trump because they don't want to lose their job or They don't want to put a sign on their lawn because it might, their property could be vandalized. It's a problem, that I can respect if someone wants to vote for Joe Biden or whatever and understands the positions, although he really didn't say much of what he thought. But I mean, that's fine. You vote for who you want to vote for and say it out loud. And, we should have that freedom without the fear of reprisal, because there's so many people out there, even in your industry, in the entertainment industry, who some of them are afraid to say that they want to vote for Trump because they'll never get another role in a movie. Or I've heard this from people, from actors and actresses. And I just think that's wrong. I think we should be able to talk to each other. Oh, you think this way, I think that way. Maybe find our common ground like you and I always seem to do, Karen. And life goes on, See you later.
Yes.
Talk to you next time.
Yes, thank you, Uncle Gary. And I want to address a couple of things, because first, I just want to address the people not getting a role in Hollywood just because I'm living it. Is that it isn't just, it is hard to get work in Hollywood, and it is not specific. It's easy to say, like, it's easy for me to say the experience, my challenges of finding the success that I'm looking for is because I'm Black, just like anyone else can say their challenges is because they're conservative. And as far as I'm aware, no one is going to jail for who they are voting for. You might lose your job. Your company might determine that you are not a good fit because we don't want racists in positions of power. However, no one is going to jail. And maybe some other company that does want to hire racists will hire you.
Who's talking about racists? We're not talking about racists. I'm talking about people who are conservative. People who have conservative views.
As far as I'm aware, no one is going to jail for being conservative, but please let me know if I'm wrong. Auntie Leni, yes. Oh, Auntie Leni, you're muted.
Yeah.
Unmute.
I did.
Oh.
It's not a matter of going to jail for speaking, whatever. It's in 4 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever it was. You were absolutely right, Gary, that nobody that supported Trump would admit to it. And that's why we were called the silent majority when he did win the election back then. And I grew up, my whole life, I was a Democrat. My whole life. I'm 70 years old. Please tell me I don't look good, but anyway. Thank you. Thank you. And my whole life I was a Democrat because that's how we grew up, and that's the area we grew up in, Illinois, and in the Chicagoland area, and la-di-da. And until Donald Trump came along and listened to everything that he was going to do and everything he said, that we said, and we never thought in a million years he would become president, but man, the silent majority got him to be president. What's happened now during this election, people are still, we're still afraid to come out. It's a different kind of coming out, Karen. And so, a lot of people were still afraid, but I have to say, I have Trump stuff all over the place. I had complete different discussions with it's the one time I have 3 siblings, and it's the one time that all 4 of us agreed on the same thing in all these years. But anyway, we've had many different discussions with many different people. I have best friends that totally were, stayed within the Democratic belief and party. And I guess I would still be a Democrat because that's what I grew up with. If I felt that the Democratic Party was the same as it was all those years, but to me and to us, it's completely different. It's not the same Democratic Party. They're talk nothing but socialism, and just our feeling is that the country is not going to be in the right direction. But that's my personal opinion.
And I fully, oh yeah, Susan, yes, please.
I am completely the opposite of you. I absolutely voted for Biden. I don't have friends who had a problem saying they voted for Trump. We had to agree not to talk about it
Right.
because I feel so strongly that Trump wanted to be a dictator. I mean, I cannot stand the man. I think that he has inhibited rights. I think he's a racist. I think he set us back or would set us back farther. I was so scared of him, I couldn't sleep. So I have an absolutely different experience of him than you do. And as far as socialism, that's the word that I keep hearing Republicans put out. But what is socialism to you? Because having health care for all is social. If that's called socialism, I'm all for it because I care about my fellow human being. And I don't think I saw Trump care about fellow human beings. I did not see a comprehensive plan for COVID. It's worse now than it was. He did not have a comprehensive plan and still does not to deal with it to this day. That was very worrisome to me. I think he inherited a good economy. I don't think he necessarily created a better economy, but I think that's why a lot of people voted for him. But I don't understand the word socialism because to me, I'm in a teaching that says I care about everyone. I care about you guys. I care about all of us having health care because that benefits me. What benefits and what's good for one is good for all. And I don't see that in the Republican Party. You know, I see them not giving aid to people during these terrible times. Mitch McConnell keeps blocking everything. So how Republicans are caring about humans, how Trump is not showing a racism card by calling people in Charleston, there's good people on both sides. I mean, my head is exploding. I don't understand how you can back that. I just don't get it.
Can I say something?
Please, and thank you. I just want to thank you, Susan, for your comment.
Okay, this goes right back to what we were talking about with the media. She made a comment about Trump saying there's good people on both sides. What the media did was they played this clip and cut it off. They did not show people the rest of what Trump said. And so good people like this who would look at someone and say, my God, Trump just said there's good people on both sides, and didn't hear Trump say, I'm not talking about the white supremacists or the Nazis. Of course, not those people. We're talking about the people who have opinions about tearing down statues. But the media didn't show that. And that's what we were talking about earlier, that she clearly gets her news from the media that is biased to the left. So and I can't even blame people for not knowing that Trump qualified that statement, and Biden during the campaign repeated it over and over. Trump said there's good people on both sides. It was a lie and a distortion. But if you don't have the right news source, how do you know? You know? So
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you, Uncle
good
Gary.
point.
David Allen Cruz, you look like you want to react to that. No, you don't. Susan, do you want to respond, or do you need to process your emotions a little bit? Susan is muted. She looks like she's processing her emotions, and I respect and honor that, because what's happening here is that trying to have a civil conversation when we have very different beliefs. When I say that I've done my own work over the last 6 months, that the kinds of things that Uncle Gary and Auntie Leanie are saying right now hurt my heart deeply. Living under a Trump presidency under the last 4 years has been the Trump himself. Let me just say, like, Trump himself is he, I don't know him. Him and I have never had a conversation. I've never met him. But my Uncle Gary and my Auntie Leanie, I know very well. I grew up with them, and I had no idea that in 2020, my Uncle Gary and my Auntie Leanie and my father would have these beliefs. And it's been heartbreaking for me. So I'm not blaming Trump. I don't blame the media. In the promo video that Uncle Gary and I recorded earlier, I called him on the things that Uncle Gary posts. My problem is not Trump. My problem is Uncle Gary. My problem is Auntie Leanie. And I had to do a lot of work so that I wasn't screaming, pulling my hair out, crying. This was a really emotional experience for me. And my Auntie Leanie and I haven't had a conversation in 8 months. I called her yesterday because I needed 8 months to process everything that is happening and be able to have a civil conversation with her without it being too emotional. And the purpose of this event is so that we can do the best that we can to continue to have spaces for unity and inclusion, and recognize that they are very difficult to have, to know that each one of us feels the emotions that we feel. I agree with Susan. I agree with my mom. I don't agree with Uncle Gary. I don't agree with Auntie Leanie, but it's important that we have the conversation. Yes, Auntie Leanie.
And just one thing, and we talked about it last night, and that is we can all, we have to all agree to just be able to disagree. You have your beliefs, Susan and Karen and everybody else, whoever, and we have our beliefs. And this certainly, I would like this to be an opportunity to be able to share these different beliefs, but you know, I don't want to get crazy, and I don't want to see anybody else be getting crazy because of what I said or what somebody else said. This should be a safe space, like you said. But if we can all just say, it can all just say that we can all agree to disagree, because that is what makes you an American. That is what makes you a person, that you are entitled to your beliefs. You're entitled to share your beliefs. You don't have to agree with them, but I am entitled to my opinion as you are entitled to yours.
Let's hear from Susan, and then Uncle Gary, you can respond.
I agree with that. And on those same words, I believe in a democracy. We have a sitting president that will not acknowledge that he lost fair and square an election, and he will not concede and he will not step down. That election, I listened to all the news medias, including Fox. And I'm telling you, even if they recount the votes, Joe Biden won the election and there was no cheating. The only person who accused people of cheating was Trump himself. And in my opinion, he accuses people of what he does himself. So now we have a president where if Joe Biden if the situation was reversed, Joe Biden would have conceded by now. Hillary Clinton did the same thing in 2016. But we have Trump, who will not even acknowledge that there was a fair election.
Let's go.
And how is that helping his constituents or anyone else in America?
Susan, Susan, Hillary Clinton, about a month or so before the election, came out and said, Joe Biden, do not concede under any circumstances. Maybe you didn't see it, but she did say it.
But that's not what happened. We're addressing what happened.
Well, no, you're saying that, if Biden,
she conceded in 2016. She conceded.
Yes, she did, absolutely. But she said it was a mistake, and she said this time, I'm telling Joe Biden, do not concede under any circumstance. So
how do I know she said that? How do I know she said that?
I've never heard this before, and this is how
do I know she said that? How do you know she said that?
I saw her. I saw it with my own eyes.
Just a moment.
Okay, but you're not answering.
A moment, Uncle Gary. Just for a moment. I just want to be very clear that if what you're saying is news to me. I never heard this about Hillary Clinton. And David Allen Cruz noted that we would like to see your source. And so we started this conversation noting the fact that each one of us engages in different forms of media. And that is a real challenge. And each one of us is really uneducated in general. All of us are.
Regardless,
the question is Trump not stepping down. The question is not.
Susan, I'm sorry. Just think. So what is important to note is we are not going to agree with each other in an hour. That this has been a very, to me, very productive conversation. I have never participated in a conversation with people from all different walks of life around politics in an hour that was safe. And I just want to note, because we have 5 minutes left, that Uncle Gary and Auntie Leanie have introduced this idea around Hillary Clinton. If you are curious, do the work, find the resources. At the end of the day, all I can say is that it is incumbent upon each one of us to educate ourselves, to have conversations with people who we disagree with, hear different information, Google it and be willing to have conversations, whether it's on Zoom, within our own families, within our own friends. This is work that each one of us has to do. We have to take classes. We have to read books because our institutions are not doing that work for us. Auntie Leni, do you have a final thought? We've got 4 minutes left. You're muted, Auntie Leni.
Yeah, actually, I just sent you, it was on NBC News. It says Hillary Clinton says Biden should not concede the election under any circumstances. So I just sent it to you. And
did send this to me, but
NBC is not one of my stations, so
it is NBC News. However, I can't open it and send it to you because you sent it to my phone and not my computer, and I can't moderate this experience and do the tech at the same time. Maybe if you texted Ronnie, it would help. Ronnie is our tech person. But I appreciate you looking up the source, finding a source that was not Fox News, and reminding us all that it is each one of our responsibilities to engage in different forms of news sources, to have difficult conversations with our families, like I am doing with my family here. And I want to thank each member of my family, each person who is not technically a member of my family, a member of my spiritual family. Ronnie put the link in for everyone to see. Thank you for that, Ronnie. So I'm sorry that we only have an hour to do this, but I'm so grateful that each one of you brought your hearts, your minds, your intentions to have a civil conversation about what's happening in America today. Miranda posted in the comments asking if Spirit Uncensored happens every week. Spirit Uncensored is not every week. First of all, I don't earn a salary from Spirit Uncensored, so I cannot afford to take the time to put this on together. However, your donations would help me do that. I just happen to have left my job recently. And if you want to support me in my ministry, I don't take a salary, but it would be a lot easier for me to petition to my board that I deserve a salary if we're getting donations online. And to be honest, we have not gotten a lot of donations online since the pandemic started. And so your contributions allow for me to do this every week, but I'm not about to do this every week anytime soon. However, I want to note that the spiritual center that I attend, I put that in the wrong spot. The Ahaya Center for Spiritual Living, where I attend, I can guarantee is a space where all people, all races, all political belief systems are welcome. And they have online services every Sunday at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Ahaya.com is their website, or I can't. There it is, Ahaya.com, AHIAH. And also the Centers for Spiritual Living in general is where I became a minister through. And for me, these are the only spaces where all faiths are welcome. The fact that I come from a Christian and Jewish background, literally in the home that I was raised in, and we celebrate and honor all faiths and focus on our own individual relationship with God. Everyone has the right to bring their own individual relationship with God. Before this started, I asked Uncle Gary what his definition of God is. And Uncle Gary said, I don't know. I can't answer that for you, actually. And to me, that proves that Spirit Uncensored is doing something right. We created a space where people of all belief systems or lack of beliefs got to engage in a civil discussion and pray together. Auntie Leni, say one more thing, and then we're going to pray out. Yes.
Just real quick.
Yes.
Did you know that when God created man, she was only joking?
I've heard you say that to me growing up. So let's pray out. I invite you all to get comfortable in your spaces, in your homes, grateful for the fact that we have come together from various places around the country, from Chicago, Las Vegas, the Philippines, places that I don't know because I'm meeting some of you for the first time, knowing that each person has shown up to this experience, choosing to be open to receive what needs to be known, to be open to be inspired by one another, to be introduced to resources and information that our media industries, that our news sources are not introducing us to, and doing our own individual work by having difficult conversations with friends and family, by telling our truth in spiritual settings, and by praying together that regardless of whether we have no definition of God, a specific definition of God, identify with a traditional religion, that each one of us has come together for for unity. And I am so grateful that we have done that, grateful to know that everything that needed to be said was said, everything that is needed to be heard is heard, and each one of us is inspired to do our work in our own way moving forward. I am grateful to know this, grateful to speak this, grateful to trust each one of us is doing this, and I just affirm this, letting this be so by saying, and so it is, amen. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm not kicking you off the Zoom. I just want to honor the fact that I think an hour is long enough to expect an event, but if you guys want to hang out and talk, we're family. We don't see each other very often. Some of you are meeting my family for the first time. Everyone is welcome to hang out. If you guys want to argue about Trump, Louise is leaving. Thank you, Louise, for coming. Do y'all. I've had these conversations with y'all individually, so I feel whole, perfect, and complete, but this space is open and free for you, for fellowship. That is what's happening now.